At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred.
All right. Good evening and welcome. My name is Vidal Dickerson. I serve as Special Assistant for Diversity and Inclusion within the Division of Student Affairs. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our third annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Oratorical Contest. One of the purposes of the Oratorical Contest is to give students the opportunity to reflect on the words of Dr. King while connecting his message to the issues of our nation in the 21st century. Additionally, participants are provided an opportunity to enhance their own writing and communication skills through public speaking. We have three absolutely amazing speakers tonight: Micaela Martinez Dedinger, Miles Ash, and Sidney King. Each will provide reflections on Dr. King's speech, Facing the Challenge of a New Age. Dr. King's delivered speech to various audiences in Atlanta, Georgia, in Montgomery, Alabama, in the West Indies, and even here at a congregation, First Baptist Church in Newport News, Virginia. Dr. King stated in Facing the Challenge of a New Age that this time is momentous, filled with hope that a new social order was being born. This time appeared to be ugly and difficult as uprisings and discontent spread across the world. The American struggle for freedom was a part of this worldwide search for freedom and equity. In the United States, the old orders of segregation and discrimination were beginning to be transformed. One challenge was to rise above individualism and become a member of a broader community. Another was to be excellent in whatever endeavors that we are pursuing. A third object was to move from hate and bitterness using a love of all humanity. This comes from the use of nonviolent strategies, learning to hate the action while loving the actor. If you're to review this work, as well as any other of Dr. King's works, you'll find that his words still ring true and are relevant in our times. Our student speakers will provide their own commentaries. They have 6 to 8 minutes to expound on the theme. They will be judged on delivery and presentation, content, connection and relevance to their CNU experiences and/or broader society, and their overall effectiveness. The speaker obtaining the highest total score will be deemed the winner of tonight's contest and the $250 prize. Don't hold me to that, students. The decision of the judges is final. Now we'll actually have an introduction of our judges tonight. We have a member of our alumni community, Cynthia Allen White, who serves as president of CNU's Alumni Society. We have an active member of our community present, Denise Kuntz, who serves as senior vice president and diversity and inclusion officer at Town Bank, as well as partners with other organizations that we're aligned with, including Virginia Center of Inclusive Communities and People to People organization here in Newport News. My colleague in Student Affairs, we have Travis Smith, who serves as director of the Office of Student Activities. And also joining us is last year's winner, our 2020 MLK Oratorical winner, Ahmed El Zamzami, who's also serving as a judge with us tonight. We appreciate our judges taking our time to be present with us, particularly streaming live from the Davis Student Union. We'll now enter our contest. We'd like to invite our first speaker to the podium. Let's welcome Micaela Martinez Dedinger.
Good evening. My name is Micaela Martinez Dedinger, and I'm a junior here at CNU. I'm truly honored to have this opportunity to speak with you all tonight on Dr. King's speech, Facing the Challenge of a New Age. Before I get into my perspective on this speech, I think it is important to share with you all that when this opportunity presented itself in my inbox, I almost passed it up. I felt that because I have been privileged enough to not have to experience racial discrimination or prejudice against myself, that I could offer no perspective and no commentary on the words of such a great civil rights leader. However, in the way that Dr. King has, my own ignorance in that thought was revealed to me once I read the speech. I now know that it is not only just the right thing to do, but a civic duty that I have to stand up before you all and have this conversation tonight. In Dr. King's speech, Facing the Challenge of a New Age, he talks about fighting a systematic evil, not the people who may be caught up in this evil. He offers solutions on how we can approach the challenges that this evil faces and the retribution that follows it. I would like to pick out two of these solutions that he offers to discuss with you tonight: unity and excellence. I would like to begin my discussion of the value of unity the same way that Dr. King began his discussion of it in this speech. He began with a commentary on the social and economic exploitation of colored people all around the world. It's no secret that this is still a pervasive issue today, not only globally, but here in our own nation. To quote Dr. King, "We must free ourselves from the narrow confines of our individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." This is a harsh call to action, to call us to love all of humanity as we love ourselves, but it is possible. If we maintain unity as our primary motivator in our day-to-day lives, we can reach past the ugliness, the violence, the instability that we are facing. Now in our country, we see polarization everywhere from our highest levels of government all the way to some family dinner tables. Our neighbors who have different political views than us are seen as other and are deemed unworthy. If we approach this current climate with unity, we can build a better new age. But how can we go about doing this? Dr. King offers some advice that is still applicable today. He encourages us to remember that we are all out to defeat injustice. We are out to defeat evil. We are out to defeat the forces of darkness. It is important to remember that these evils and these darknesses present themselves in many different faces for us all. And furthermore, we have to remember that each one of us in this country are facing our own darknesses and our own evils. And it is not the actions of the people who may be caught up in these evils, nor is it the actions that we don't understand or feel adding to the problem, that are actually the problem. It's the system. To quote Dr. King again, "This is what we must continue to do. Keep it within the realm of struggling against an evil system and not against the persons who might be caught up in that system. That neighbor who you disagree with and you no longer talk to, the Facebook fights that you see happening that drive you crazy. These are all just symptoms of a system that is rotting itself from the inside out." This brings me to my second value that Dr. King discussed: excellence. Dr. King began his discussion of excellence by posing a hypothetical question. He asked, how will we confront the cruelty and violence that might and will probably come as a result of our standing up for justice? These sentiments of doubt and fear have reverberated through the ages, from January 1st, 1957 until today, January 21st, 2021. Only now this question has a different format. For example, how can we begin to solve the problems we're facing when we can't even agree on what information is true? The answer to this problem today is the same as it was in 1957. We approach these problems with excellence. In this speech, Dr. King urged the Black community to be excellent in all that they did, so their power, their skill, and their determination to bring about social change could not be ignored, and all it could do was succeed. This is the same call that is being ushered to each and every one of us today. A contemporary of the civil rights movement, a singer named Gil Scott-Heron, once sang, "The revolution will not be televised. You cannot plug in, turn on, and cop out." In a technological age, this call is even more relevant. We must pursue this motivation of excellence by stepping outside of the insulated comfort zone that social media has provided us. We all know that social media's algorithms are made to insulate us with those who share our same opinions. It makes reaching others that have differing opinions than us even more difficult, and it harbors us in our own extremes. To follow this motivation of excellence, we must have those hard conversations in a harsher environment. We must talk with those who disagree with us. Furthermore, we must use excellence as a complement to unity. When we have these conversations, ask them what are their goals for their children. What are their passions that they're pursuing in life? What is their hope? What is their hope for our nation? Perhaps with unity and excellence, we can build upon each other's answers to these questions. We can build respect. We can build knowledge of where each other come from. And we can once again be proud to say that we are Americans just as much as our neighbors are. I end with the challenge that Dr. King presented to me when I read this speech. Remember that we are fighting against an evil system, not against evil people. Approach your neighbors with compassion and empathy, but do not lose sight of the goal. I hope that each and every one of you will take this conversation and spread it and create it into a larger conversation so that we can face the challenges of the new age that we're entering as one. Thank you for your time.
Our freedom was not won a century ago. It is not won today, but some small part of it is in our hands, and we are marching no longer by ones and twos, but in legions of thousands, convinced now that it cannot be denied by any human force. Today, the question is not whether we shall be free, but by what course we will win. Our freedom was not won a century ago. It is not won today, but some small part of it is in our hands, and we are marching no longer by ones and twos, but in legions of thousands, convinced now that it cannot be denied by any human force. Today, the question is not whether we shall be free, but by what course we will win. Our freedom was not won a century ago. It is not won today, but some small part of it is in our hands, and we are marching no longer by ones and twos, but in legions of thousands, convinced now that it cannot be denied by any human force. Today, the question...
All right, we would like to thank Michaela for her speech, and I appreciate her honesty. I'm glad you're still reading my email. I know a number of students are not anymore. The Oratorical Contest came from student interest 3 years ago. Actually, the precursor to the event was an essay contest. And I remember the conversation with the students that said no more writing. And I like to recognize those organizations that were originally involved in shaping this effort. And in alphabetical order, the Asian Student Union, the Black Student Union, Latino Student Association, the National Panhellenic Council, the Student Diversity and Equality Council, and then later contributions came from the Multicultural Inclusiveness Board, Ladies, and the NAACP. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Joseph Seri, Department of Communications. When we first began to craft the Oratorical Contest, we definitely needed some expertise, particularly surrounding the rubrics that the judges are using. So I'd definitely like to recognize him, and if he's not with us tonight, I'm hoping the communication students and the faculty to make sure that you spread that recognition to him. Now, we're ready to invite our second speaker to the podium. Next, we'll hear from Miles Lewis Ash.
First off, I would like to thank all of you for this phenomenal opportunity, especially for it being my 4th day on campus, so thank you. Martin Luther King's Facing the Challenge of a New Age is a timeless and relevant piece today as much as it was over 60 years ago. Love is a very important theme in this speech and can't be more absent during this time of racial, political, and moral conflict. During the tragic and horrific attack on our nation's capital, 5 lives were lost, and many more were injured. That needless violence could have easily been remedied if it wasn't for the surplus of false information overtaking this generation. We live in an age of information where everything you could possibly need to know is at our fingertips. But instead of educating ourselves and reevaluating our allegiances and beliefs, we simply reinforce them, regardless of their harm to others or their social implications. In a time where anyone can pursue a vast amount of clarity, we are blinded by our own irrational fears and harmful biases. Dr. King said that we must love our enemies and bless those who curse you. We all must do a better job to separate opinion from fact in order to allow love to win, in order to make this country as great as we know it can be. Another common theme Dr. King expounds on is justice. He mentions it frequently throughout his speech. The definition of justice is the quality of being fair and reasonable. In all this time, we are yet to fully grasp it. Justice is what our generation needs to truly come together as a people, regardless of color or creed. Many confuse justice with equality. Equality is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunity. Although, even with equality, people of color have their rights and opportunities diminished through stereotypes, preconceived biases, and deliberate lack of resources made by those who we seek equality from. Justice corrects this obstacle through education, representation, and the adjustments to the system made to keep us from reaching higher ground. If we lived in a truly just world, we wouldn't need to single out a person of color for achieving greatness. Dr. King said that you must set out to do a good job irrespective of race, and do it so well that nobody could do it better. To this day, it is still rare to see people of color, specifically African American people, reaching this level of achievement in fields such as medicine, engineering, and entrepreneurship. Please don't misunderstand. We should be celebrating those who achieve first, but not as a finish line, but as a beginning. So there can be a second, a third, a fourth, and so on, in order to not become comfortable or satisfied with only one person's success or being good enough. Our Vice President, Kamala Harris, is one of these women of first, California's first woman and African American to serve as Attorney General, the first South Asian American to serve in the Senate, and now our first ever person of color and female Vice President, just to name a few. Although I would like to remind you that there won't be a Kamala Harris without a Barack Obama. There won't be a Barack Obama without a John Lewis. And there won't be a John Lewis without a Martin Luther King Jr. It is true that with the efforts of these leaders, we were able to make leaps and bounds towards true justice and true equality, but we're not done yet. The day we achieve true justice and equality is the day we lose the need for scholarships exclusively for minorities, or the day where we finally have equal representation in honors and advanced public school courses. A 2017 article about my own school district back home shows that proportional representation will be 40% white, 35% Hispanic, 12% African American, and 10% mixed race, along with roughly 3% for Asian Americans, American Indians, and Pacific Islanders. Although the real racial disparities in the AP courses was 75% white, 13% Hispanic, 5% Asian, 4% mixed race, and 3% African American. Our honors courses showed similar numbers, with the white population having over 65% representation. When it comes to individual classes, we see that the most diverse happen to all be AP and honors courses commonly taken freshman year of high school, and even those classes are far below the proportional representation. This raises the question, how are we supposed to unify and come together as a country when we are visibly divided at such a young age from those who are raised in different environments, have different home situations, eat differently, look different, and interact differently? Emmanuel Aiko once said, "Proximity breeds care, and distance breeds fear." During the most malleable years of anyone's life, how can we get closer if you're raised in a system that can lead so many children, in the words of Dr. King, to a psychological death? Only by closing this gap can we come together as human beings and recognize each other for the content of our character and not the color of our skin. I wish to share my voice today so those that look like me and have fought for me throughout history do not have their sacrifices be in vain. As a young black man who's been insulted by being called one of the good ones, going through high school being one of very few black male students in an advanced placement course for the past 5 years, I wish to share my voice to diversify those classrooms in order to bring us all together. Dr. King and an armada of other leaders started this battle to finally see freedom ring. I'm sure they're looking down on us right now, not with disgust, but with a contagious smile on their face, stretching from ear to ear, bearing witness to the progress we have made in their absence. Now our generation has one thing to do: finish the job. Thank you.
I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice.
I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle, to a movement which has not yet won the very peace and brotherhood which is the essence of the Nobel Prize. I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle, to a movement which has not yet won the very peace and brotherhood which is the essence of the Nobel Prize. I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle, to a movement which has not yet won the very peace and brotherhood which is...
All right. And thank you, Miles, for your presentation. And I definitely want to recognize that you're one of our first-year students. So when he mentioned that this is like his fourth day on campus, that was not an exaggeration. So thank you for sharing with us. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was a legendary orator. Many may not know that he had been participating, and a vast majority of the time winning, speeches and debate contests since he was a child. He was an undisputed master of delivering and making speeches, and he only got better as time went on. His clerical training certainly helped in that regard. He was reared in a tradition of the Black church, which makes charismatic speaking a virtue. But more than that, it equipped him with a knowledge of what notes to hit, the morals and convictions of his audience, and their needs and desires. It equipped him with a toolbox of authority to draw from. One of his greatest assets was indeed his voice. He was a gifted singer as well as a speaker. He had a distinctive vocal quality that anyone who has ever heard him speak would recognize immediately. Now, we'll have our third and final speaker, Sydney King. Let's welcome her as she approaches the podium.
How do we build community? This is a key question of leadership and a theme central to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s work, especially in Facing the Challenge of a New Age, where King repeatedly urges the audience to pursue brotherhood over strict individualism, community over pure self-interest. Part of my job description as a resident assistant is to build community, meaning I'm tasked with facilitating social connections, trust, and mutual respect among my residents. In a freshman dorm hall, this is pretty easy. I set up ice cream in the common room, talk to one-on-one with residents about classes or other experiences that we share as students at CNU. But I only ever have 20 to 50 people in my immediate residential community. This one-on-one form of leadership and relationship building is not scalable to a larger community or to a society. An American ice cream party would not be effective, not only because it's impractical, but because some people like cookies and cream while others despise it, and some can't have dairy, so we need to have almond milk ice cream. If America would have such a wide range of ice cream sundae preferences, then how much more are our ideological differences in politics, the economy, things that matter more than dessert flavors, and other identity-based differences like race and religion, which add complexity to community relations. So this is the challenge for our leaders, a truth Dr. King identifies in this speech: the critical ability to appeal to a collective cause even when there are not apparent commonalities or universal knowledge in a heterogeneous community like our country is especially important for organizers like King, organizers who seek to motivate people to action on behalf of a particular movement, whether it's for boycotting buses, participating in a sit-in, defunding the police, or storming the US Capitol. The best organizers use storytelling and the construction of a compelling public narrative to build community and thus effectively lead. I argue that leaders who use their personal identities, especially stories related to those identities, can unify their audience effectively, can show that smart people can disagree about important issues, and that they can communicate in a polyphonic way, which is to say they can tell one story that resonates with all different types of people at the exact same time, which is breathtaking. Dr. King was a masterful storyteller. In this speech, he opens with a vivid story of deciding to commence the Montgomery bus boycotts on a brisk and cold December night. He talks about where the movement has been. Little did we know on that night that we were starting a movement that would rise to international proportions, and continues with where he sees it going, that the movement would soon ring in the ears of people of every nation. This epic-style storytelling catalyzes the dynamic unity and collective willingness to suffer that he talks about as being necessary ingredients for the success of the civil rights movement. On Sunday, this past Sunday, I was part of a Zoom call with Stacey Abrams, the 2018 Democratic nominee for governor in Georgia. The theme was From Chaos to Community, a reflection on Dr. King's later work, Where Do We Go From Here? In many ways, that work is a response to the challenges he poses in this speech we are reflecting on today. Abrams said, I have a responsibility to build community. We all do. She said, but community is complicated. If you only associate with people who have the same beliefs, the same thoughts as you, well, that's a cult, not a community. And that made me chuckle when she said it, because she's right. The assumption that because our politics, for example, differ, that our humanity differs too, is not true and not helpful. Stories build legacies. The example most are familiar with is Barack Obama's 2004 Democratic National Convention speech. It's known as the speech that made Obama president, and was effective because he wove together his personal biography, his party's values and vision, and emphasized the urgency of social change. King mirrors this, or more accurately, Obama mirrors King. Stories inspire us to act or to join ongoing action, and this is why Dr. King's use of them was so effective. In the year before his death, in a sermon, Dr. King said, I say to you this morning, that if you've never found something so dear and so precious to you that you will die for it, then you aren't fit to live. He had such a faith, a Christian faith and a faith in the movement, that he expressed this sacrifice he was willing to make. And I'll mention that he organized his part in the civil rights movement largely around his Christian values and Christian faith. He spoke at churches. This speech we are reflecting on is one example. He used scripture to argue for justice, and this made sense for him because of his personal biography, being a pastor, having a degree in systematic theology, his family history, his dad being a pastor, and maybe part of King's leadership genius was that he was trained in and practiced Christian evangelization, which was no doubt useful in a sort of civil rights movement evangelization, getting people to join his cause. He bore witness to the utility of abandoning denomination. Religious, he mentions in this speech, the ministers of this city have been willing to forget denominations and realize a deep unity of purpose, but notes the importance of doing this in other ways as well, for the pursuit of a common cause. Later, he writes, "Together we must learn to live as brothers, or together we will be forced to perish as fools." This was a thread running through Dr. King's work, and to achieve that community and that communal understanding that he aspired to, storytelling and the use of public narrative that King used present themselves as a leadership tactic that contemporary organizers should also adopt. Thank you.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream
right. We'd definitely like to thank Sydney for her presentation. I know she's one of our devoted Bonner Scholars, so I hope the Bonner Scholars are representing. I think they're able to chat or text on the site, so maybe they can represent themselves during the virtual audience. Definitely 3 great presentations, and we really appreciate you all, first of all, responding to my email, and participating and taking part in this opportunity to not only reflect on King's words, but to display your unique work, your unique thoughts, and your unique reflections. Of course, it was close. And one thing that I do want to provide before we announce the winner, I think originally when we had planned the setup or the structure for the event, we were going to actually have an honorable mention that's usually determined by the audience. We didn't set up our technology accordingly, so what we will do is actually for the individuals that aren't considered for first place, we're still going to provide an honorable mention prize of $50 per, okay? So everyone leaves a winner, right, tonight. So by very close scoring, of course, we would like to recognize our 2021 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Oratorical Contest winner, Sydney King. I wish we had the large check and the balloons, et cetera. So I'm hoping, particularly in the virtual audience, they're giving you all the accolades, et cetera. But definitely for Michaela and for Miles, know that we honor your work and your presence with us tonight. So we'll be awarding you with $50 for participating in the event, okay? So thank you so much. I definitely want to recognize my friends with scheduling and event services, Alicia Brown, Walter Walker, whose birthday is today, who has been definitely working hard all day and definitely helped set up. I'm hoping we're getting out enough time so he can at least party just a little bit. To OCPR, the Office of Communications and Public Relations, we thank you for your work. Kyle Commons, thank you so much for coming through again. And then, of course, for you, my phenomenal judges and friends, thank you for your willingness to come and be present with us. And then also, of course, for our participants, thank you so much. Thank you, community members. Also, our celebration of Dr. King does not end. In fact, we just want to plug very quickly where you can join the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the next virtual panel discussion. And this is Equity 2021, What Would King Say? And this is scheduled for Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m., where we'll actually have panelists, Dr. Willis L. Lonzo III, who serves as the General President of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Anthony Febo, who's our very own President of the Upsilon Beta Chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity here on campus, and Dr. Kianga Thomas, who serves as President of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Zeta Lambda Chapter, and also Associate Professor for Norfolk State University. And this dialogue will be moderated by Dr. Angela Spranger, who serves as our Chief Diversity Officer. So again, thank you all for participating in tonight's event. Let's please keep the spirit alive and in our engagement. There are many more activities that are occurring both in the community but also here on campus. But thank you all for participating in tonight's event.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you